The clock on the cabin wall clicked to 4:15 p.m. just as the first splash of red hit the paper. It wasn't an accident. My sister Jessica stood at the edge of the dining table, her wrist tilted with deliberate ease, watching the wine slide from her glass and spill directly onto my son's painting. The deep red spread quickly, bleeding into the soft blues and greens Jacob had worked on for days. The paper curled at the edges, the lake he had painted dissolving into a muddy blur. Jacob was 6. That painting had taken him 3 afternoons. He'd sat quietly by the window, tongue tucked between his teeth, carefully brushing color onto paper while telling me how proud Grandpa would be. It was supposed to be a gift, his version of love, wrapped in watercolor. Jessica watched it ruin with mild interest, then shrugged. "He needs to understand the world doesn't care about little drawings," she said, her words loose but confident. "It's cluttering the table, and honestly, he's too sensitive." She set the empty glass down directly on the soaked paper. The room responded exactly how it always did. Uncle Mark laughed from the couch. "That's a real-life lesson right there. Toughen up or get crushed." Someone snorted. Someone else smiled. My mother gave a small, nervous laugh, the kind she used when things were slipping out of control, but she was determined to pretend they weren't. Jacob didn't cry. That was the worst part. He sat completely still, staring at the ruined page. His hands trembled, hovering just above the table like he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch what was left. His shoulders drew inward, his chin tucked down. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Jessica. He tried to disappear. I recognized that posture instantly, the way his body folded in on itself, the way his silence became a shield. I had worn that same shape for most of my life. He wasn't waiting for comfort. He was waiting for the moment to pass. In that frozen second, something inside me cracked open. I wasn't watching my son get teased. I was watching him learn a survival skill, one I had never been able to unlearn. Be quiet. Don't react. Make yourself smaller so the danger gets bored. I had taught him nothing, but I had modeled everything. The laughter faded into an awkward quiet. My mother sprang into motion, grabbing napkins and dabbing at the table like the real tragedy was the wood beneath the mess. "Oh, Jessica, you're always so clumsy," she said brightly. "Sarah, don't look like that. It was obviously an accident. We can get him another art set. Maybe one with stickers." She smiled too wide, eyes darting between faces, begging the moment to pass. "Let's not make a scene. It's a holiday. We're family." I looked at her hands, busy, frantic, avoiding the ruined painting completely. Then I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound slicing through the room. Every conversation stopped. I didn't reach for paper towels. I didn't check on the painting. I stepped between Jessica and my son. I could feel my heart pounding, but my voice came out steady when I spoke. Flat, measured. "You liked that," I said. Jessica blinked. "What?" "You enjoyed watching him make something," I continued, staring directly at her, "and you enjoyed destroying it." She scoffed and reached for the bottle. "Oh, please, it's just paper. You're being dramatic." "Useful things don't make messes," she added, pouring herself another glass. "I'm helping him." The room went silent. I felt it then, the shift, the moment where the rules everyone had been living by started to wobble. I glanced at my father. He sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his hands clasped too tightly together. His face was calm to anyone who didn't know him, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the whitening knuckles. He was holding something back. He always had. Before either of us could speak again, my mother stepped forward. "Enough," she said quickly. "This is getting out of hand." But she still didn't go to Jacob. She wiped the table harder. "We'll replace it. Please, let's just eat." Jessica leaned back, emboldened. "He's soft because you baby him. The real world isn't going to care about his feelings." That was when my father stood. Not abruptly, slowly, like a weight finally shifting after decades. He walked to the mantel where a wooden sign hung. "Family is forever." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned to my mother. "You cleaned the table," he said quietly. "You didn't check on the child." My mother froze. "David, I'm just trying to keep things calm." "There is no calm," he interrupted. "There's only silence, and I'm done paying for it." He twisted his wedding ring, working it off his finger with visible effort. When it finally came free, he walked back to the table and dropped it onto the soaked painting. It landed with a dull final sound. The room emptied of air. Jessica laughed nervously. Are you serious? Over a kid's drawing? My father didn't look at her. He reached for a black leather notebook from his bag and placed it on the table. I track failures for a living, he said calmly, and this family has been cracking for years. He opened the book, and that was when everything we thought we knew began to collapse. My father's hands moved with deliberate care as he opened the leather-bound notebook. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, columns of dates and numbers, every entry meticulously logged. Each line was evidence of a lifetime spent noticing details others ignored. 3 years ago, he began, his finger tracing down the page, you told me you needed money for a business venture. You said your influencer career was taking off, but you needed equipment. $5,000. You promised to pay it back. Jessica's eyes rolled. And I mostly did. Is this supposed to be an audit? Mostly isn't enough, he said, voice steady but heavy. And it isn't about the money alone. It's about trust, accountability. Everything was tracked. Every withdrawal, every expense, every excuse. He turned the book so both Jessica and my mother could see. Columns of numbers glared back at them. Dates spanning years, all annotated with notes, groceries, repairs, emergencies. But behind the mundane, a darker truth emerged. I watched Jacob, still huddled in his chair at the table, his small hands clutching each other. He looked confused, his eyes wide, unsure if the adults around him were going to explode again. But he stayed silent. He had learned to be small, to fade into the corners. My father continued, his voice rising with measured intensity. And then I hired a forensic accountant. Every transfer, every hidden payment, traced. His finger moved to a highlighted entry, 3 years prior, the night of the Labor Day party we didn't attend. This isn't an allowance. This is ransom, $174,000, not for business, not for gifts, for a crime you covered up. The room went still. Jessica froze mid-breath, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears threatening to spill. You hit someone, my father said, eyes locked on Jessica, and then fled. A 19-year-old girl walking her dog. You didn't face the consequences. You used our money, our retirement, to pay off lawyers, settlements, and repair costs. You built your freedom on stolen security. Jessica paled. It was an accident. No, my father interrupted sharply. It was a choice. You chose to protect yourself, and you let everyone else pay. And tonight? His voice softened, but remained firm. You taught my grandson that destruction has no consequences. Jacob looked up then, for the first time, confusion and fear warring in his face. I stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. His small fingers clung to mine, seeking reassurance. I gave him a tight, quiet squeeze. He didn't need words. He needed to feel that someone on his side existed. My father's gaze swept across my mother, who shrank under the weight of his stare. Her frantic attempts to maintain calm were meaningless now. Susan's carefully constructed world of appearances was crumbling. You helped her, he said, his tone quiet but lethal. You enabled this. You valued your image over your child's safety. You let her tear him down while pretending it was discipline, pretending it was a lesson. My mother's hands trembled. David, please! No, he said, voice firm, each word slicing through the cabin like a blade. No more excuses. I have been patient for decades, counting every lie, every betrayal. And now, the final accounting is here. He flipped a page. This time, taped to the paper were receipts, bank transfers, confirmations of payments. 3 years ago, you told me it was a parking dispute. You told me it was handled. You hid the truth behind lies, deceit, and manipulation. You stole our future to cover your crime, Jessica, and you've been teaching my grandson to tolerate the same injustice. Jessica stumbled backward, her smug confidence evaporating. For the first time in years, she was not in control. She looked at my father, then at me, then at the wine-stained painting on the table, her hands shaking. I didn't know, she muttered. Her voice, usually so commanding, wavered. No, my father said, leaning forward, his voice a whisper now, cold and precise. You knew exactly. Every single step was intentional. You've spent your life believing that manipulation, lies, and charm would protect you. Tonight, you see they do not. He opened the ledger further, showing additional documentation, police reports, correspondence, and verified records. This isn't just about money. This is about accountability, about understanding the weight of your actions. You've been reckless, cruel, and selfish. My mother sobbed quietly, hiding her face in her hands. She could no longer maintain the illusion of calm. The truth had ripped through it like a hurricane. Jacob, still small and wary, watched the adults around him. For the first time that day, he did not shrink. He did not fold into himself. His small chest rose and fell, and I could see the faint beginnings of understanding forming in his young mind. There were consequences. Actions had weight, and someone would protect him. I stepped fully between Jessica and Jacob. "He doesn't have to learn the world is cruel from you," I said, my voice unwavering. "Not today. Not ever." My father nodded at me, a brief flicker of relief passing over his face. I could see the apology in his eyes for all the times he had not intervened, for all the moments he had silently watched me suffer under Jessica's shadow. Jessica's bravado collapsed entirely. Her expensive dress hung limp, her eyes darting to the windows where storm clouds pressed against the glass. The sound of rain outside was a steady, relentless reminder that no one could hide now. "You have 1 hour to vacate," my father said finally, his voice carrying across the room, low and commanding. "The cabin is being listed tomorrow. Your accounts are frozen. The money you funneled for your crimes will be reclaimed. You are without resources, without refuge, without leverage. You must leave." Jessica's phone hovered in her hands. She tapped, swiped, frantically checking accounts. The look on her face, gray, drained, defeated, was a sharp contrast to the woman who had stood over Jacob moments ago. So certain, so untouchable. "You were never in control," my father said calmly, echoing the truth I had long felt. "You rented power, and the lease has ended." Silence settled in the cabin like a physical weight. The storm outside pounded against the roof, matching the tension in the room. Jessica's tears began to fall, unbidden, as the reality of her situation set in. My mother, broken and small, could only weep. And there, in the center of the chaos, Jacob exhaled. His tiny fingers let go of mine. He touched the ruined painting briefly, then looked up at me, a shy, tentative smile forming. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not completely. Not today. I knelt beside him, brushing a damp curl from his forehead. "It's okay, Jacob," I whispered. "You're safe now. No one will teach you cruelty as a lesson." For the first time, I felt the full weight of what we had done. We had dismantled a toxic legacy, exposed lies, and reclaimed power from people who had thought themselves untouchable. The cost had been high, the storm had raged, but for Jacob, and for the first time, he could be just a child. And that was the victory worth every battle. 6 months later, the sunlight in our new apartment was entirely different. It poured through tall, clean windows, brushing the walls in warm white light. There were no shadows of tension lurking in corners, no heavy presence of fear or expectation. The space was smaller than the cabin, but it breathed peace. Jacob sprawled on the floor, glue and wood shavings scattered around him. He laughed freely, a sound unburdened by fear or expectation. My father knelt beside him, guiding his hands as he carefully cut a wooden frame for a painting. Sawdust clung to our sleeves, and every now and then a stray flake landed on the carpet. "You have to measure twice, Jacob," my father said gently. "Precision keeps the frame strong. If the frame is strong, the art is safe." Jacob's tongue poked out in concentration. "Like this, Grandpa?" "Exactly," my father replied, smiling softly. "Exactly like that." I sat against the wall, watching. For the first time, I didn't have to intervene constantly, didn't have to smooth edges or shield him from cruelty. He was learning skills, joy, and patience, the world on his terms, not someone else's. The weight of the cabin and the stormy Labor Day party was behind us. My mother, Susan, now lived in a small condo a few towns over. She sent letters occasionally, rambling messages blaming us for tearing apart the family image. I burned them without reading past the first line. The illusion of her control was gone, and I refused to let it poison our peace. Jessica had fallen hard. The fraud investigation had triggered a full audit, and she was drowning in legal fees. Her social media career was in ruins. She had to sell her car, move into a tiny studio apartment, and face the reality of life without the network of protection and privilege she had always relied upon. Her confidence, her power, and the carefully curated persona she had built over decades evaporated in weeks. And yet, there was an unexpected sense of relief in watching her struggle. Not cruelty, but justice. Not revenge, but balance. She had relied on borrowed authority, and now it was gone. She was alone. I looked at Jacob again. He didn't flinch at mistakes. He didn't fold under criticism. When glue spilled or the wood frame splintered slightly, he simply grabbed a rag or adjusted his cut, laughing at the small chaos of creation. The lessons he learned were now about care, precision, patience, and resilience, not fear. My father watched him with a quiet pride that I had never seen before. He had always been meticulous, exacting, a man who tracked fractures before they became catastrophic. But now he was teaching someone not to fear mistakes, but to embrace learning and growth. I thought back to that Labor Day afternoon, the wine spilling across the table, the laughter of those who were supposed to love us, and the frozen weight of silence that Jacob had learned to inhabit. That moment had been pivotal, the turning point where legacy collided with action. It had been devastating and necessary. We had dismantled a family structure built on fear and deception to save the people who mattered. The cost had been steep, relationships severed, comfort lost, a life of facade stripped bare. But the reward was immeasurable: freedom, safety, and the chance to rebuild on a foundation of trust and love. Jacob finished sawing his frame and held it up with pride. "Look, Mom, I did it!" I smiled at him, a genuine light smile. "You did it, sweetheart. That's perfect." My father nodded in agreement. "Perfect, Jacob. You measured carefully, and it paid off." That's the way to approach any challenge in life. For the first time, I could breathe fully. The echo of trauma, the inherited chains, the fawn responses, the learned silence, was gone from Jacob's posture. He was no longer trying to disappear. He existed fully in the moment, confident in his presence, secure in the knowledge that someone would protect him. Even as the apartment filled with the scent of sawdust and glue, and the afternoon light streamed across the floor, I felt a peace I had never experienced. The small joys of parenting, untainted by fear or manipulation, stretched out before me. The terror that had once gripped every holiday, every family gathering, every casual remark, was gone. We had paid a price, yes. My mother and sister had been forced to confront truths they had spent a lifetime avoiding. They were diminished in ways they had never known. But in doing so, they could no longer harm us. We had broken the cycle. We had burned the bridge of the old family to save the foundation of the new. Jacob looked at the frame, then at me. "Mom, can we paint next?" "Yes," I said, laughing softly. "We can paint next. And this time, nothing will ruin it. No one will touch it without your permission." He beamed, returning to his small workbench, already planning the next piece. And in that moment, I realized the profound truth we had achieved. The freedom we fought for wasn't just ours. It was Jacob's. It was the inheritance of courage, self-respect, and protection, a legacy we could proudly pass on. 6 months later, the shadows of our old family, the deceit, the manipulations, the silent terror, were nothing more than memories, vivid and sharp, but powerless to touch us. We had rebuilt, we had reclaimed our lives, and most importantly, we had reclaimed Jacob's childhood, a space where he could be small in size but limitless in spirit. I thought about the Labor Day painting, now carefully framed in the corner, its colors still warped but its essence intact. A reminder that destruction could be met with courage, that cruelty could be countered with action, and that even small hands and young hearts could survive, thrive, and learn to fight back with love and wisdom. And as I watched Jacob laugh and measure, saw the sawdust drifting like tiny stars in the sunlight, I whispered a quiet promise to myself and to him. No one would teach him to shrink again. No one would show him that fear is the only way to survive. He would learn patience, creativity, resilience, and strength, the lessons that matter. The storm outside had passed. The world still raged, unpredictable and often unfair. But within these walls we had carved our sanctuary. And that sanctuary was enough. We had broken the chains of the past. We had saved ourselves. And most importantly, We had saved him. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to exhale fully, to lean back against the wall and simply be. Jacob's laughter filled the apartment, mingling with my father's gentle instructions and the warm afternoon light. And in that moment, I knew we had won, not just a victory over others, but a victory over fear itself. The price of peace had been high, but the reward, a childhood untainted, a family redefined, a legacy transformed, was priceless. And as Jacob carefully glued the final corner of his new painting, I whispered to the quiet room, to the life we had rebuilt. We are free.